Well, good evening, and thank you so much for joining us. And welcome to Irrigation Basics, Tips, and Tricks for the Home Gardener, presented by Master Gardeners of Placer County. My name is Brooke, and I'll be your moderator tonight. This workshop is being recorded. In a few days, you can find the link and the accompanying resources at our website, pcmg.ucanr.org, under the Virtual Gardening Workshop sections. If you have questions during the talk, you can post them to the chat menu and the presenter will answer them at the end. Now I'd like to introduce your speaker for the evening, Steve Bowles. Take it away, Steve.
Thanks, Brooke. Tonight I'll be discussing one of my favorite and sometimes most painful topics, irrigation. We'll discuss the basics, talk about some tips and tricks that I've learned over the years, hopefully to help make your project a success, save you some heartache and time and cost. So I always like to start my presentations with a definition of the topic, and here I present the Merriam-Webster definition of irrigation. I think one of the most important words in this definition is artificial, right? So here in our zones, we're not blessed with consistent summer thunderstorm and high humidity, both of which come with their own problems. But for us, artificially augmenting the water that nature gives us is critical for growing most plants and trees within our environment. So that irrigation is critical, obviously, and so is the efficient delivery of that water during our hottest summer months. Throughout history, we've been focused on moving water not only for consumption and survival, but for the growth of plants to eat. So now I probably wouldn't use an aqueduct today, although we do have a semi-modern aqueduct system here in Placer. But as homeowners, we have sometimes too many to water our gardens and landscapes. So we'll talk about the different options that folks have in our county and cover the following in the workshop. So irrigation is a massive subject, and in the short time we have today, I couldn't possibly touch on everything that you may want to know. So my guess is in today's presentation, you'll see some things that are familiar, some that hopefully are new and helpful, but my goals are to cover the basic terms and concepts and explore the components available for irrigation systems, provide some simplified slides to help you plan a new system, help you upgrade your current system or expand it. And then throughout, I've woven in 20 years of success and failure, mine that is, on irrigating where I live on a 2-acre parcel, and hopefully help you avoid some pitfalls and problems that I've experienced. So let's go ahead and dive into the topic. First off, we'll go ahead and talk about components of an irrigation system and some basic terminology. These slides are not all inclusive, but I've focused on providing those that are critical and most commonly used. Note that not every system will have all these different pieces, but hopefully the list will raise awareness for what's out there and what's available and what you can ask for if you need help at a big box store or online when you're buying irrigation pieces. So irrigation at the most basic level is moving water from point A to point B, right? And in most of your home environments, there's probably a point C, a point D, a point E, a point F, and depending how big your property is, it could go on and on and on. So to move that water, we need to choose what I call the highway. And most systems will use two different types of pipe. There's PVC, which I think everybody's familiar, and then there's black poly tubing. So they're easy to distinguish. One's white and rigid, the other is black and flexible. Both come in a variety of sizes and lengths. Typically larger sizes are utilized for runs from the water source, and more on that in a minute. A few details to understand. First, white PVC pipe comes in different thicknesses, and of course the engineers have to make it challenging, right? And they call it something different. They call it schedule. So the higher the schedule, the thicker the pipe wall. So typically Schedule 80 pipe is used for long supply runs, and the thinner Schedule 40 is used out in your zones or in your garden. You can use both. It's nice if you're doing long runs through through soil that might go under a driveway or something like that, that you have the thicker wall. And you can easily identify the pipe by the printed text on the outer shell. You can see it up here in the PVC. It's got that red printing on it. You've probably seen if you've been out in the garden and seen your PVC. Most gardeners are familiar with the black poly pipe, but mostly the drip pipe. You can also buy the poly pipe, thicker and larger diameters, to run through areas that might have underground obstacles or structures like rocks and stumps. It's really easy to bend and you can move around, and it still does a great job of carrying the water from point A to point B. It's very easy to work with, and you can carry, this local stores carry all different sizes and thicknesses. Filters. Filters are often overlooked when using a domestic water supply, because a lot of folks either don't know or they assume that it's contaminant free. Why do I have to filter my water that I get from the city, right? I recommend always using a filter of some type, as calcium deposits or rust that could build up, pieces of pipe or dirt that gets into the system, can wreak havoc on your drip system. So it's a nice insurance policy. There's two main types of filters. There's mesh filters and disc filters. And there's some others like sand filters and more complex ones, but that's kind of out of the scope of today's chat. The table on the side shows the proper mesh size for the sprinkler or emitter type. And disc filters are preferred for dirty water that may have biological elements. So if you have ditch water, a shallow well, or a cistern, or you're feeding from a pond, that's probably your best option. Otherwise, you'll be cleaning your filter every hour. So filters should be cleaned on a regular schedule, and otherwise you'll get blockage. And typically that occurs on the hottest day and your plants die. So make sure that you clean those filters on a regular schedule. So another important component that's overlooked often is a pressure regulator. So if you have a drip system, this is absolutely required. And without one, you could have a system blowout or failed components. The typical water supply from a house is in the 40 to 60 PSI range, which is 2 to 6 times what drip components are supposed to be stressed under. So understand that the system may not pop initially. I had a friend that set up their whole drip system, so proud of himself, and a week into it, he forgot to put the regulator in. It blew while he was out of the house at work, and he ran up a pretty large water bill. So it won't pop initially, but over time with the heat and the expansion and the cold, and especially in our environment, weak points will eventually fail, and you'll have a failure of your system. So always use one of these in your drip zones. So they're easy to install. Some of the filters that you buy now have the pressure regulation incorporated in them. I was at a couple of the big box stores, and they're making them now all in one, so you don't have to buy all these separate components. And you can buy them for tubing. You can see the one on the left here goes to a hose bib, or you can buy them with pipe thread to put in your connections on your pipe in your PVC. Okay. An anti-siphon or backflow preventer. What these little guys do is they actually prevent backflow of water into your source, and your source could be your house. So I want you to think for a minute about that soaker hose that's out in your garden, and you just applied that beautiful compost tea or that fertilizer, and that water getting sucked back into your domestic supply, into your ice maker. Probably not going to taste very good, not good for you. Maybe some health benefits, probably not though. But you should have these on all your hose bibs as well as your sprinkler line. One note, you can see the sprinkler head here has a siphon incorporated. Typically, those are the U-shaped sprinklers, and then there's straight through ones that don't have the siphon. So you always want to make sure, especially if it's plugged into domestic supply, that you've got that siphon type of valve for your sprinklers. Valves and timers. So for the simplest drip setup, your valve is your hose bib, and the timer is you, right? You go out and do your watering. But if you want to automate your irrigation, timers and valves can chop up your yard into different watering zones that let you control the delivery of water and automate the whole task, right? So they can be separate components, such as valves controlled by an electrical timer, and they can plug into the electrical system. Or you can buy combined units that have a valve and a battery or solar driven timer and controller, which is really nice, especially if you live on acreage and you have some remote areas where you want to put some trees or a remote garden in the house. And you don't want to run electrical and pipe and all that kind of stuff. These are really nice. I have one down in my lavender field that turns on and waters my lavender because it's, you know, a couple 100 feet from the house in any water. So very, very nice components today that you can use. So sprinklers have really come a long way since I was a kid. I remember the days of brass sprinklers, and you had two choices, right? A Rainbird Impact sprinkler or those little brass spray heads that just dumped water on the sidewalk. Right? Today, there's all different types of sprinkler heads. I won't go over these. I think most of them are obvious. Everybody has some knowledge of sprinklers and the different types. The one that I will mention are the rotary nozzle sprinklers. So these are relatively new, and they're called rotary multi-stream. Rainbird makes them. All the other companies make them as well. They're fantastic for water conservation. So if you want to reduce your water flow by 60% and bring your bill down, you can put these in, and they're really nice because for the most part, you can slip them into your pop-up sprinkler bodies, just plug them in. They do require a little more time to soak the lawn, but they'll definitely help save you on water consumption. Okay. If you're like me and love to go to the big home improvement stores, you're probably overwhelmed in the drip irrigation section, right? There's all types of connectors. Everything you could ever imagine, right? You've got drip heads, bubblers, sprayers, soakers, drip lines, emitter tubing, all different types of stuff. You can go really simple or you can get fancy, depending on what you want to do. The ones that I use the most on the screen that I think are easy, you can clean them, and they work really well with our water pressure, especially if you're using well water. Are the flag drippers, which you see there with the blue tip, which you can take apart and clean. And then I like to use something that's called drip tape. And drip tape is essentially flat tape tubing that has drip emitters at specific distances. And you can buy them in 6-inch, 12-inch, 24-inch spacing. You just roll them out, plug the end, put the other end into your water supply, and you can drip. It's really nice for raised beds and also line if you're doing row crops. They can't be beat. Really, really flexible and easy to use. And it's kind of an erector set for big kids or gardeners, right? You can take all these pieces, put it together, and build your system. Okay. Many gardeners assume that what you see is what you get with drip irrigation, right? If you walk out after a watering, you'll see some nice big circles of water that have that's penetrated the soil. But note that in different soil types, there's different patterns under the soil. So the water drips and begins to spread in kind of an onion-shaped pattern under the dirt. So if you have deep-rooted crops or deep-rooted plants, you'll be able to really get some nice coverage with drip lines. If you're doing seedlings, sometimes it's a little challenging because you might miss the shallow roots. So just to give you some tips there. Okay. So that's the end of the component section. Some really quick tips, and this is the longest section. We'll get into the other stuff real quick. First off, the web is great for finding just about anything that you want from an irrigation perspective. Beware of Amazon and commerce sites like Alibaba. A lot of those components are absolute garbage. They won't work, they'll clog up, and they're not tested. So I definitely buy from a reputable source. Always use that filter and pressure reducer. And there's also emitters that are pressure compensating. So if you have lines that go up and down in elevation, you want to use those. Otherwise, you won't get even water distribution. And then once again, I can't talk enough about drip tape. Really handy, easy to use, and can help you get a nice big system out pretty quickly. Okay, let's move on to the planning stage. So one of my favorite planning quotes is from Benjamin Franklin: by failing to prepare, you're preparing to fail, right? So like any other project, irrigation planning and preparation is critical. I've been guilty of it over the years. I go out and I just throw something in to make sure the plants don't die, right? Because it's getting hot. I don't do my planning and I end up getting bit and losing some plants. So take the time to plan. It'll definitely be worth it. A couple basic considerations. Number one, know when to hire a professional, right? There's things that I won't do. I won't touch 220 electrical for pumps and things like that. I just don't want to deal with that. It's a little too risky for me. I don't want to dig trenches. I got a bad back. So kind of pick and choose. And there's contractors that'll come out and dig for you or run electrical or do the pipe. And if you just want to do the above ground stuff, you can do that. Time saved versus time spent. I mean, right now, I'm sure as gardeners, we have a ton of stuff that we water by hand, but that doesn't work well if you go on vacation or go away during the hottest time of the month. So save that time. You can put in a nice little drip system and put it on a timer and do that. And then lastly, thinking about water saving and conservation. Obviously, with our drought, it's nice to be able to put in a system that'll take less water and put less burden on the watershed. Okay. We talked a little bit about this in the previous section, but one of the key planning things is to figure out what type of soil you have. And if you don't know, you can go to the Master Gardener website. There's some great methodologies to figure out your soil. For the most part, we're going to have loamy clay soil types, and a good bed is about a 1 gallon per hour flow rate to prevent runoff and get max penetration into the soil. There's some great references on your resource sheet for this, as well as on the Master Gardener website that you can use to figure out the type of watering that you need for your soil type. Get a quick sip. So moving on to water sources. Many of us here in Placer County have multiple water sources. I know for my property, I have a well, an old hand dug irrigation well, ditch water access. So we've got different types of water sources, and the different water characteristics for those sources kind of define how you're going to plan out your system, because it determines pressure, flow rate, as well as how dirty the water is, right? So the type of filter maybe you put in, and the type of tubing that you might use. So all these different elements, something to think about when you're looking to build out an irrigation system. These are some math slides. I know some folks are scared of math. There's a really simple test to figure out your flow rate. This might not be a big requirement for folks that are on city water, but essentially you take a 5 gallon bucket and you time how long it takes to fill. And typically that'll be a number of seconds. And then you take that, you can convert it into gallons per hour. So why is that important? I'll show you here in a second, show you how you use the info. One example, I'll give you an example. So one of my wells is 5 gallons per minute, right? So the sprinkler manufacturers give you these really nice charts that show you the pressure. So if you look at the lower chart here, and we look at a pressure of 40 PSI, I know that each sprinkler on that circuit is going to take 1.22 gallons per minute, right? So one sprinkler will use a gallon per minute, requires a gallon per minute flow rate. 2 would require about 2.5. I can put 4 of those sprinklers on one zone and still have enough water flow to get the full throw of the sprinklers. Okay, so this is just some basic math. A lot of the manufacturers actually have calculators on their website where you can tell them how big your area is, and it'll tell you how many sprinklers you can run with the flow rate that you have out of your hose. Okay. There's also a chart in here. I won't go over this too deep, but different size pipes and different wall thicknesses will give you a different maximum flow rate. Why is that important? If you're running a big pipe from your water source out to the fields, you want to make sure that you choose a big diameter. You can see the different diameter PVC pipes and then the flow rates. And once again, this will be posted so you can have access to this chart for some planning. Quick rules of thumb for 1/2-inch tubing. If you're doing drip, you can do don't exceed 200 feet or 200 gallons per hour, right? Remember, you can calculate the drip rate on all the different. So if you had a gallon per hour drip emitters, you could have 200 on a single 200-foot line, right? So if you're doing grapes or you wanted to do a long row of sunflowers, you could do that. And then for the smaller tubing, the really thin one, you know, I go to my mom's house, she's got like 80 different drip lines on her porch to keep all her things alive, but don't exceed 30 gallons per hour or 30 feet, okay? So these are just some rules of thumb, so you don't have to do the math. You can say, okay, I'm good for drip lines with this number of emitters and this gallon per hour, okay? One thing I recommend is to always sketch things out, right? You want to make sure that that you have a plan before you go out there and start digging or start laying out your tubing. Take measurements. It'll give you an idea of how much material you need. And then the most important aspect is laying out your zones, right? You want to see how much flow you have and make sure that you can feed all the plants that are in a particular area of your yard or on your property. Okay. So to wrap up planning, some tips and tricks. If your watering zones are any type of distance, you want to use the largest supply pipe. Don't mix emitter types and zones. So don't have sprinklers and drips. If you do that, water likes to take the path of least resistance. So it'll go to the sprinklers and your drip emitters will get the short end of the stick. I always plan for expansion. Like all gardeners, I have visions of grandeur and how I'm going to lay out all my future areas, although I can't really maintain what I have today. But always put maybe a stub of pipe or an end that you can add to down the line if you have that ability to use. And then lastly, use the charts and references out there. Once again, the sprinkler manufacturers and the big box stores have designers where you can go online and just make really light work of figuring out how to plan your system. Okay, so now the fun part. We know what we got. We've planned it out. Let's put it all together. 2 rules you should be aware of. You're going to spend a ton of time and effort putting this system in. You want to protect it, especially at higher elevations. Bury your pipe if you get hard freezes, and protect pipe that's exposed. 8 to 12 inches is a good depth. I know I've seen folks that bury it with just a little spattering of dirt, but burying it deep is good, especially if you're watering during the winter. And then this is one that bit me. All those anti-siphon sprinkler valves need to be 6 inches higher than the highest sprinkler. Okay, so if you've got kind of a tiered backyard and your valves are below those sprinklers, you could have issues with pressure and the valves actually closing. Okay, making connections. With PVC pipe, it's a 2-step process. You've probably seen the purple primer and the blue cement. The primer actually initiates a chemical reaction that allows the cement to bond the material and give you a really tight seal. So you want to make sure that you spread that primer on and then put the glue on. And when you put the pipe together, twist it so it smears the glue across the joint and gives you a nice solid seat. Also with PVC, if you have pipe thread, always use white pipe thread. You can find it, or pipe tape. You can actually find it in the plumbing section. You just roll a couple revolutions of that and tighten it on, and it'll give you a nice good seal on anything that's threaded. And then with the poly tubing, it's really simple. One thing that I always say is make sure you do perpendicular cut when you actually cut the tubing, and then push it onto all those little edges. What do they call them? What's my name? My name here. The little indentations on the end there. Make sure that you push them in and that you cover all of those and pull, so it gives you a nice good seal. Okay. To prevent leaks, make sure that all your pipe joints and threads are completely free of dirt and dry. So as mentioned, the pipe tape and with screw down joints, make sure you use that pipe tape. Don't go cheap on the glue. If you're trying to conserve the PVC glue, you're just going to end up with a leak. Put plenty, a very good amount on the joint, seal the joint, and then clean it with a rag so that you don't get that excess on the outside of the pipe. And then you want to make sure and inspect your work. After 15 minutes, you can go ahead and pressure test it and put water into the pipe, and then perform all your tests before you bury the pipe. That's a good one to remember. Otherwise, you could have a unwanted drip system under the dirt. So some tips and tricks. If you're doing PVC work, I always find it nice to take a big square of cardboard to bring out to put it underneath as a work surface for me in the dirt, so I don't get dirt and grass and stuff like that on the pipe and get it dirty, which will create issues. So once again, that's just a nice little work surface. Wear gloves. I've, as careful as I've been and as much PVC as I've put together, if you don't use gloves, you're going to have purple hands and glue all over, and it's really hard to get off. In fact, usually it takes a couple of days unless you use some type of solvent. So definitely wear gloves for that work. There's two tools I recommend, and you can see them on the screen. The first one's really slick. It's actually a PVC cutter. And it doesn't look like it would cut through the pipe, but it's just with a couple clicks, that blade actually goes right through the PVC pipe, and it gives you nice perpendicular joints that give you a nice seal when you put the pipe pieces together. And the other one kind of performs the same purpose, but for the poly tubing. So the purple tool there on the screen actually has a cutter and then a puncher that'll punch holes so you can put the drip emitters into the system. Okay. So if you plan well and take your time, the end result will be success, right? As long as we can get water to those plants and keep them alive. So finally, no matter how careful you are, there's going to be dirt and debris within your irrigation system if you're building one from scratch. So I typically leave the last emitter, I'll put a cap on the end so I can flush the system before it goes live. If you don't do that, you're going to get dirt and debris stuck in your sprinkler, your emitter tubing, and then it's a pain. You have to go through and do some troubleshooting. If you have to troubleshoot, which there's always something that goes wrong, right? Once the system's in place, I always test or cycle the system through the different zones to make sure that everything's working the way that I want it to, and that there's no leaks, right? And no clogs. So if you're having problems, start with the filter, clean out the filter, get everything out of there, then go to the emitters and you can start to check for debris and things like that. I actually will use a moisture meter in different areas just to double check to make sure, because a lot of the sprinklers will run at 3 in the morning or 4 in the morning. So I want to make sure that they're constantly getting the appropriate water to the plants. And then with everything else, I always say you have a phone a friend, right? If you have a friend that knows irrigation really well or can help you or has done it before, they're definitely a great resource. And then you can always pick up the phone and call a contractor, which gardeners don't like to do. They like to do things on their own. So, but that's always an option. Some quick maintenance. We talked about filter cleaning. Those flag drippers are really nice because you can actually pull out the flag and flush them, and they catch any of the debris. Run that zone test, especially in the warmer months, a couple times to make sure that everything's performing well. There's nothing worse than walking out after that really hot day and seeing, for me, one of my hydrangeas is dead because one of the emitters got clogged, right? Flush the system at least once a season, and then also clean the heads of algae. So if you're running ditch water, I get algae clogs. I've got like frogs in some of my lines in my filters. You get all kinds of strange stuff. So clean your filters, clean your heads, especially if you're using ditch water, because you can get algae buildup and other types of things that'll slow down your water flow. Okay, I've got some great references here. The UC Davis. There's an irrigation and soils homepage. We've got some irrigation links, and then I've got some commercial links as well. The commercial manufacturers they want you to use their parts and pieces. So they have just amazing libraries of pretty much anything you want to do in irrigation. In fact, Rainbird and some of the other ones have big, thick manual PDFs that you can download, 500 pages. Once again, more than you'd ever want to know about irrigation. But if you want to read up, there's some great sources out there. Okay, and then you can always go to the Master Gardener website under our resources and have all kinds of good information.
Awesome, Steve. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Barbara has a question. She says, I have a valve cap that keeps popping off, especially when we've had a hot spell. Any ideas on what could be causing this?
That's on the sprinkler valve.
Barbara, can you type in? Is it on the sprinkler valve or on yes, on a sprinkler valve?
Yeah, what I've seen is that sometimes the sprinkler valve caps get stripped. They do have threads that you can tighten down. If they're popping off, you might have to replace the valve because those threads are part of the main body. So that's what I've seen.
Thank you, Steve. Does anybody else have any other questions? I put them into the chat menu for Steve. I think that is it. Well, I'd like to thank you all again for coming. If you have any questions after this presentation, you can hit us up at our Master Gardener hotline. The number is right there. And as Steve has pointed you to, our website, pcmg.ucanr.org. That will also tell you what's coming up next for our different workshops that we have. And as a reminder, it's been recorded, and if you give us just a little bit of time to get it uploaded to our site, you'll be able to find the references and the workshop. So thank you so much for joining us this evening, and please feel free to leave the workshop. Thank you again. We'll see you at the next one.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you, Steve.